Hi, welcome back to Interfex Live. We're here with Mike Valazza from Catalent. We're going to be talking about tech transfer and the role the CMOs play and where in the life cycle that fits in. In my experience, tech transfer and working with the CMOs, technology transfer covers a lot of stuff. And by stuff, I mean all the things that ultimately are going to cause the problems: product, technology, testing. There's myriad of areas we're going to talk about. So Mike, let's just start with where do you pick up the contracts? Pretty much. I mean, when people come to you, is it real early on? I mean, where does Catalent pick it up?
So basically, Catalent, we could work from the very early phase 2, phase 1, clinical batches, do packaging, distribution, all the way through commercialization. So if you look at it like a train, you can pretty much get on and off at any stop. Obviously, we're looking for programs that come on early. We work through phase 1, phase 2, do the scale up into our commercial manufacturing sites and produce the product and send it out to distribution for our customers.
And you guys are fully integrated? You do the packaging as well?
We do clinical packaging. We have some commercial packaging primarily in Europe. We're looking to reinvest in packaging where it's strategic in our manufacturing sites. But as you may recall, Russ, a few years ago, we divested the PCI business because it was a standalone packaging business. And we really want to bring in packaging that's integral to the manufacturing that we do at the sites.
Right, I think that's important because I think that's pretty much what people are used to. Most companies have a fully integrated part to it. So I think if they're going to go to a contractor, they don't want to go to yet another contractor. I think it just works. It's a smart operation, smart way of doing it. So it sounds to me like tech transfer actually happens many times. We say get on and get off the train. So every time we get off the train, that means you tech transfer it back?
Yeah, it's either in or out, right? So, one of the things that I think a lot of people overlook is how many times that you actually have to do a technology transfer, even if you don't outsource. If you're scaling up, back in the days when most of the pharma companies had their sites in Puerto Rico, now they're Ireland and other lower cost manufacturing sites, you're still transferring from the R&D center off into the commercial manufacturing site, and that's a technology transfer. So it's no different when you're working with the contract world, because you're bringing in products and you're doing a commercial tech transfer into the site, or you're doing a scale-up tech transfer into a development and scale-up site. I think the thing that we bring to the table in the contracting world is that we do this every day. That's has to be one of our primary core competencies, or we won't be successful, because no product starts at a contractor. It's 100% technology transfer in.
Right, that's an interesting point. So I think there's a couple of ways of looking at it. So let me ask you this first off. So yeah, obviously it's your core competency, but where do the problems usually come up on tech transfer?
I would say the biggest area that people don't anticipate a problem, I'll answer that first, because you can have a problem anywhere. But people spend most of their time looking at equipment, making sure that it matches the SUPAC guidelines, like for like, what's the tablet press that you have, what encapsulator, what granulator, and it's really focused around the process. But there's actually more issues in technology transfer with analytical methods than there actually are with processing. And I think in many cases, the analytical methods are transferred more times than the process is as it moves from lab to lab. You just think about your own companies, any companies you've worked for, you got who's doing the method development, then they've got to transfer that method to one lab or another lab. How many different sites are doing the work? So I would say that's where more problems arise, is when you don't get the result that you need from the analytical. Was it the process, or is it an issue with the method? And that could essentially hamstring the timeline if you're trying to do a technology transfer and scale up.
So let's just talk about that for a second. So what do you want to make sure is in place first? I think the analytical sometimes is more iterative, to be perfectly frank. I have to agree with you. I find that technique and certain methods, if they're not developed properly, are probably more sensitive than any process I work on. So having said that, what does clients usually do? Do you run the process first, the analytical first? How do you get that so the timeline meshes?
Yeah, so the ones that tend to run this more smoothly, we'll transfer in the process, we'll still have the customer or the sponsor do the analytical method testing if they have that. At the same time, we'll do a method transfer, so essentially we'll familiarize ourselves with the method, then we compare the results and make sure that we have the same results as part of the validation process. I think one of the things that I've seen that's sort of strange over the years is that when people come in, they bring all their technical people in, doing a tech transfer, do their due diligence. Then when you actually do the work, they don't ever send an analytical person to work with the analytical lab people. So, are they doing the reagent mixing the same way? Have they calibrated the equipment the same way? Are they doing the injections the same way? And, it's more a conference call and whatnot, but yet they will have R&D people, engineers, tech transfer scientists, and everything else there at the site. But it just seems that occasionally they leave the analytical person, off the trip.
I couldn't agree with you more. It's like, I don't know, maybe they don't qualify for, travel expenses, I don't know. But I found that myself, that's a major problem. And and I think your point is even better, people seem to forget that derails a timeline just as easily as if the process don't work, so.
Well, that's it. If you don't get the result you expect, and it's an analytical result, you don't know if it was the process or it was something to do with the method. And then, then the other thing that sometimes happens, of course, we're in the contract world now specifically, but it probably happens within big pharma itself, is then you start to get into the blame game sometime, whether it's between the companies, well, worked at my plant, we hired you guys, how come it doesn't work here? Or between the different areas of specialty. Yeah. So wait, this is an analytical issue. No, it's not. It's a process issue. If you let that, really crop into the business, then you're just basically heading down a path of no return. Yeah,
well, can't say that I've ever worked for a company that blamed anybody, so I'm good. So Lifecycle management. I mean, my experience has been cradle to grave, ex-Novartis myself. So I look at it, cradle to grave. I knew what life cycle meant. What does life cycle mean in the case of a contract manufacturer?
So to me, we look at it as life cycle management for many years was defined as a way to manipulate the dosage form, come up with a different format. Early days, it was just making a controlled release dosage form. Now it tends to be how do you handle and manage the asset through its patent life. And for us, in many cases, it's optimizing the process, continually putting it in the equipment, whether it's upscaling or downscaling the equipment size to match the capacity so you can have the most efficiency. Case in point, we have a customer active now for confidentiality reasons, don't want to mention who it is, but we actually studied their IMS data and anticipated the fact that at the growth rate they were in, they were going to actually consume all the capacity in the equipment that was qualified. We're using Worcester Coder for controlled release, and we went to them as part of an initiative twofold. One, for us to manage their capacity. Secondly, to also be able to reduce cost in the manufacturing supply chain. So to me, that's part of managing the life cycle of the asset, because this asset still has 4 or 5 years to run. We asked them, look, we'd like you to invest in scaling up to the largest Worcester that we have, a Glatt 46-inch. Take your batch size up to 450, 500 kilos of coated material, and we'll be able to reduce your price because we'll have more product per unit time, less analytical testing, and we're anticipating the growth curve that your product's in. That's a virtual mid-tier company that outsources everything, and if their level of skill with managing manufacturing is a little bit different if they would have had their own network of plants. They might have anticipated it at the same time we did. But for us, we look at it as a responsibility that those assets that we manufacture in their API, their products, are in our pipeline, and they're part of our network as well. So we also owe it, as far as life cycle management, to make sure that as a team, we're making wise decisions in how we manage the asset.
That could pose another problem. I think that that's certainly proactive on your part. I think that's important, but a lot of times these guys have already put a stake in the ground, and if they've already submitted, we're kind of screwed because that's the batch size.
Yeah, I mean, we've had those too. The thing to remind people is that when you're at the commercial scale, and if you're just going to double the batch size to go to the next largest size of equipment, you're well within the 10x rule to do the scale up. So that's not an issue there. You have to go back to the original filing sometimes and see if you have enough runway. In this case, we did, but not every case is you do. And I think those are the trickier ones, Russ. The ones where you can, it's a lot easier to just scale up and make a larger batch size. And, API cost factors in as well, but then to just add continual equipment. But even if it's adding additional equipment of the same scale, in the contract services world, that is part of the lifecycle management. The other thing, you know, being with Catalent, and I'm working in the advanced delivery technologies sector, it's also looking at what technologies that we also have in our portfolio that can improve the bioavailability and release profile, sometimes, you know, doing things a little bit differently than maybe they envisioned, to be able to, again, make the product a superior product compared to what other products are out there. Because at the end of the day, it's all about the patient.
Absolutely. You know, just a couple of points I want to put that I want to circle back to, and then I want to revisit the whole thing with the technology platforms. I think, first of all, what I've always found was when we did a tech transfer, it'd always be the guys that could, you know, they roll in the bleachers, you know, all right, let's all come down there and take a look. To me, a lot of times I look around at that team and there's a lot of people that probably didn't need to be there, but there was a lot of times there's folks that should have been there. And I think we touched on one part. Clearly, to my mind, somebody with a regulatory knowledge should be part of the tech transfer team, but from your experience, what the composition of that team and who have you seen?
Yeah, I would say that, you know, most people get 80–90% of the team right. You know, you need to have somebody there that knows the formulation, you need process engineering, you need people from both sides, both companies to bring the right people to the team. The areas where I see people left off, a lot of times you don't have an EHS person on a team. When you're working with a contractor, you don't have a finance guy on the team, but yet you're paying the contractor to do the work, and both parties have a budget that has to come in. And, you know, so in many cases it defaults to the project manager, which is fine, that's where it should ultimately lie. But in the initial, you know, one of the initial meetings, there should be a person there that from finance, that from the sponsor company, that understands the budgets, how the purchase orders work, and things like that. But I would say that, you know, the key mistake that I often see when you're working with someone that's basically in the virtual manufacturing world, and more companies are going that way these days. Even big pharma now are starting to close plants and outsource simple manufacturing anyway, IR basically not a core competency anymore that they want to invest in. What they forget to do most often is as soon as they make that decision to outsource, they need to start to bring the manufacturing people from the place they're going to outsource at. So if they're going to pick Catalent, they should start to involve the Catalent manufacturing team still when the project's at their site. Because within Catalent Network, one of the keys to success that we have, because we have development centers and then we have sites that manufacture throughout the world, we can bring the people, they all work for us, we bring them to the other sites earlier than we probably need to, so that they learn the process. We can ship operators between sites, that somebody who ran the pilot scale can go to the commercial scale. Now, I've been based in for many years I was based at our commercial manufacturing site in Winchester, Kentucky, right outside Lexington. And one of the keys, I think, for that site is they're very excellent at tech transfer, but the person who we assigned to the program when it came in stayed with that program all the way through the validation batches. So you had consistency of someone that knew the entire bulk of business, all the batches, all the successes. Now, if they left the company, you can't stop that. But we didn't switch technical people because a better product came along or you know, whatever. We made sure that we balanced everybody's workload. We do that in most of our Catalent sites. One of the things I also see that happens sometimes on the pharma side is they have a group that just does the formulation and through phase 1. Then they hand it off to a scale-up group. Then they hand it off to a commercialization group. And then it ends up in the manufacturing site. And just within pharma, that's a tech transfer every time, even if it's the same company. They don't keep the same consistency. So on the third, you know, when someone's trying to do the site registration batches, they may see something that comes up that happened very early stage when they were working on the benchtop. That guy's not around anymore. You know, he doesn't stay with the program. He takes it to where the limit is. He hands it off to the next guy in the chain. And I think, you know, some of the keys on our end of it, again, it's part of the life cycle management of the program. We look at the program and we bring it in, and the person tells us, whether it's, you know, when you were at Novartis, if you came and told us, here's a product, Mike, we want to commercialize it with you guys, we'll put that team together and we'll do our best to keep that team together all the way through to the product launches. Project management, technical team, quality people, everybody's on the team. But I would say that you know, where there's mistakes, it's not integrating the team with all the right people.
Yeah. I think on that note, I think something that people always have to look at, and that is management of knowledge. I mean, and again, this was something until I stepped back and really thought about it. You know, knowledge is only good if it's explicit. If it's something that's, we call it tacit knowledge. In other words, if it's the guy that was early on in the development found that there was something that wasn't quite right, but they didn't codify it, that knowledge never gets transferred. So it's important to relegate, and everything has to be codified. And especially if you're in a situation where it goes from Joe to Bob to Tom, because it's going from different phases. It's an excellent knowledge, and I think that's what we do. We create explicit information.
Yeah, I'll give you another example real quick. So, because it's not only when you're scaling up. So we had, you can go in another situation, it's older products, end of life cycle, being moved out so it's already a commercial product. How many times you saw a situation, you know, and it's probably a rhetorical question, but how many times have we all seen a situation where we're going to close a site down and we're going to transfer the products to another site? Products get to the other site, but all the guys who made the product for 15 years are no longer with the company. So it's back to the same tacit knowledge. So you end up with the knowledge vacuum. You transfer it in, you do your 3 batches, you get them to work. To me, I mean, I know we've come to the definition of 3 batches as validation, but it's nowhere in the FDA guidelines does it say 3.
Nope.
You know, I always look at it, people ask me, I've been on panels before, it's like, well, why do we do 3 batches for validation? Well, 1 isn't reproducible, right? 2, you could be lucky, so 3, it's done. Right? We did it 3 times, we could have done. But to me, you're really not comfortable with the process until you got 30, 40, 50 batches under your belt, no problems, all different conditions, all different seasons, because humidity could make effect. So a batch you make in the summer in a process, you know, an air-driven process like a coater, coating pan, whatever, humidity changes. I mean, I don't know how many times when I worked for GLAD did I see an issue where somebody up in the Northeast or in the upper Midwest, big pharma companies, check your list off, has their site in Puerto Rico, doesn't work.
No shock there, though.
You know, why? Well, anybody look at the humidity, right? And now we've got, you know, we do that kind of stuff. But tacit knowledge is important, and making sure that you capture all of that.
Right. You gotta, and then you gotta reduce it down to explicit. Absolutely. It's kind of sad when you think about it, because here we're sitting. Allegedly, this thing was valid, and it's been the way it was, and it should work, and we transfer it in, and guess what? Batch record doesn't result in the same result. That's pretty sad when you think about it. But I want to just touch on one other thing. One of the things that came up yesterday, we had some folks, because we've been, you know, CMO and that whole virtual aspect has been, it's just exploding. And we try to capture a lot of that on the sessions the other day too. And one of the things that I know is always raised as a concern, and it is, I'll call it, it does in a way fit with tech transfer, and that's IP, okay? What I found interesting was we had 2 guys in from Sutherland, Dave Wigley and Bill Warren, and they talked about a tech transfer of your IP before you go to see a CMO. In other words, what do you got? What should be protected? What are you going to give away? And the same thing from the guy who's going to see. So I'm saying, how does that all work into this tech transfer thing?
Yeah, I mean, it's a tricky question. I didn't hear what their answer was, but I would say that where you get the issues is when both parties bring IP to the table, and now you're commingling a sponsor's IP with a drug delivery company's IP. I mean, within us, that's always, you know, the difficult part. Who owns what at the end?
Yeah, exactly.
And then who has the rights to sub-license, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? So when in the contract world or the drug delivery company's world, we've always taken the view that you're coming to us for our technology. There's a reason you're coming to us for that technology.
Agreed.
So you spend a lot of time seeing how the technology will work together, almost like a paper transfer. How's your API? Like we make Zydis wafers, which is a lyophilized tablet for instant delivery system. We could do a paper feasibility with their API into our IP just based on chemical structure and the things that we know what it will take to be able to make sure that if there's IP related to the API and there's IP related to our delivery system, that those will mesh together and get that out of the way before we actually do the work. But the real key then becomes is, you know, if they're going to then manufacture the product with us, which they typically do, and with any drug delivery provider, you know, if you have the technology and ability to manufacture it, you're going to stay there. Well, for them, it gets a little bit tricky sometimes because they feel like they're at a competitive disadvantage because they're using your technology and you're holding them hostage. I've actually had people use that word with me before. But at the end of the day, you came to us for a reason in the first place, and it's really not in our best interest to let you take our technology back out into the field. So it becomes very tricky to sometimes unwind all of that.
Yeah.
And how do the two technologies work together?
And I think that was, I think actually they agreed with pretty much everything you said. Because remember, their objective is to avoid, contrary to popular belief, it's not to anybody's advantage to have patent litigation. The best thing in the world is to agree on royalties and terms, and everybody walks away happy then. So their point was, find out what it is you're giving away. I asked them a very specific question. I'm shopping a drug, I want another SKU, I want a new technology, a new delivery, and I shop it around. And am I educating my competition by shopping X molecule, old one, off patent, with Catalent or whoever else I'm talking to, and I find that my competition comes out with something not on your platform, but on somebody else's who I had spoken to. Am I putting myself at a disadvantage? That's, I think, how what's your take on that? You follow my line
I do.
of thinking.
I mean, I don't think you're putting yourself at a disadvantage. I think the issue there is really, did you signal something that was going on that somehow got out that maybe shouldn't have got out or would have taken longer to get out? You know, it's very difficult because it's, you know, everything is confidential. We handle everything under confidentiality. We at least within Catalent, we have a very strong ethical wall. And if somebody comes to talk to us about a program, we don't take that idea then and say, well, we didn't really work with Russ, so but maybe we'll go over here and let them know what Russ was thinking of, and we can do a deal with Russ. I mean, it comes down to the companies you're working with. But to answer your answer that you answer, yes, you are, because you don't know. If that's the first time in many cases you're talking to those people, whether it's me or somebody else, you don't know how, you know, at the end of the day, what you're going to do. But you do that too many times where you'll find out that your business isn't prospering the way it should be because people, you know, word gets out.
Oh, yeah. Well, yeah. We won't go into the downside of what actually happened in the end. Suffice it to say that hot on our approval, there was another one. So anyway, so let's get back to the tech transfer thing. I thought IP to me is part and parcel. If you're going to do a tech transfer, I think that's something people have to have in the back of their head. And the only reason it triggered when these guys talked about it, I thought it odd that they would pick up tech transfer as a platform to think about IP. So what do most companies struggle with tech transfer? I mean, what do you provide to help them? I mean, obviously, if a large pharma comes to you, I mean, they pretty much got, you would hope they got their act together, but how do you walk them through it?
Well, I would say in many cases, most people struggle with tech transfer is just that they don't do it the people on the tech transfer team don't do it as often as we do it, I guess is what it is. So I'd say, you know, one of the key things that we always try to imply on, again, we're contractors, so we're sensitive to the pricing and the proposals that we put together, but we'll put it in a proposal that we should do a demo batch before we actually start to do clinical batches, or even when we do the scale up to the commercial. It's like we'd like to do a demo batch or an engineering batch before we actually start the process validation if it's the first time at the scale. And big pharma will sit down there, in our world, oftentimes it's perceived as, oh, you're just trying to put more money into your proposal, we really don't need that, and whatever. And we've got, like I said, in the CMO, contract development world, you know, all the way through, we're doing that every day. Everything's a transfer. So we're very good at it. We look at what gets put in there, and we really don't try and take any shortcuts. So that's the other, you know, work with a lot of generics too. You know, give me the least amount of batches I can to get filed because I'm in a race for the first to file. Totally understood, but what you don't do now, if you don't go back and do later, you're gonna have troubles at launch. So we find a lot of issues there where people just don't, and especially in the generic world, they don't want to do the upfront work now because they want to get the filing in. Completely understood, it's their business model. But you have to then come back in and invest in the process. And I would say the blind spot that I've seen with many of the generic companies I've worked with is they don't know where if they end up in a paragraph 4, how it's going to settle, when it's going to settle. So they keep deferring doing that work, and then all of a sudden they get a call, hey, our legal, we settled with the other company, we're going to launch in 90 days, and they're not ready. Right, so that's another area. I would say the other next area for real is the complexity of the process is where we see a lot of troubles too. In the world that I live in, we don't get the easy programs because you make it yourself if it's easy. So the competency that we can develop, in many cases, for tech transfer, process optimization, and scale up, to me, they go hand in hand. That 3 is you can't just separate those, because after you transfer it in, you got to do something with it. If it was an easy, simple blend and compress, you don't need to outsource that if you could do it yourself. But if you're trying to do a triple pulse release product to be able to deliver a dose now, a dose in 4 hours, a dose in 6 hours, 8 hours, you've never formulated and scaled up one before, you're looking at the drug delivery companies, and we've done that before. So it's really then understanding everything that's going to be involved in order to make that transfer successful.
Then, so let me ask you this: so who heads up who do you think should have oversight on the transfer team? One from each side, I would suspect.
Yeah. So the key to me in a tech transfer is to make sure that you've empowered the project manager. They have the complete power. You don't go changing project managers in the middle of a project. You keep that consistency. That they then have the ability to hold meetings, virtual meetings, face-to-face, occasion, because you could have people calling in. Nowadays, it's really easy to do video and a lot of different things right on your laptop, where you can be in a video room. But you need to, but you also need to have a central repository where all the notes are. So the people that do it the best is you have the project managers able to I've seen it get as exotic, for lack of a better word, of having a website for the project, where both sides can actually upload information like the MSDS, data sheets, and whatever, because when you get together and you're still starting that transfer, you're still bringing a lot of things to the table, whether it's vendors, approved excipients. I got hung up on a tech transfer once where the product was coming from Europe. We couldn't get the same grade of coating material from the company that they were buying it from is a global company. But what they were selling in Europe, they didn't offer in the US. It was slightly different. I've seen issues, we do a lot with soft gel. And is gelatin that you can buy in the United Kingdom the same as gelatin that you buy in Japan? So you have to work with a company that understands that. We understand that, so we can take the cases to make sure that you can be successful.
Yeah, I think that's a key. I think most people don't even anticipate that, but that's, I said no only because I already stepped on that landmine myself a long time ago.
And if the project manager is not the person leading the team, that's where all that knowledge has to reside. Yeah. You can't have a procurement guy do it. You really don't want a scientist to do it. They've got to do their phases, but you really both sides need to have a proactive project manager, stays ahead of the program and anticipates all those issues because they've seen the landmines just like you have.
All right, let's bring this around to closure on that one point that we were talking about. Let's assume we're at the end of the process now, all right? And I think we should spend a little bit more time on, so the guy comes to you, all right, you're in manufacturing. What's the biggest mistake they make then? I have my own ideas as to what possibly could be, but what's usually the biggest mistake?
Well, I think I might have said it already. Really, the biggest single mistake that I see them do is not do an engineering or demo batch before they go in and do the validation. And then the other one is you mentioned bringing the grandstands in with all the people on the bus, but they go home after the third batch. So I would say that's probably the two biggest mistakes is not doing enough of the pre-work before you go into validation, then your validation fails and you didn't understand the process in the first place. And second, really not managing the process and looking for little nuances as you do batches 4, 12, 15, and whatever, because like I said, I used to manage a site, did that in my career, and I really never felt comfortable at a process that was in my facility until we ran 25 to 50 batches without a hitch. In a row, all different shifts, day shift, night shift. Everybody understands the process. You've educated the people. Tells me the batch records are understandable. and everybody's able to get reproducible results time and time again.
I'll tell you, Mike, in a lot of cases, again, based on where I grew up, I can tell you that we never lived by the 3-batch paradigm. In other words, a tech transfer was only accomplished based on a period of time which was defined based on what we expect the pickup to be. If it was a product that was going to be relatively a large seller, we said that we held hands on every batch for the first 20 batches.
Mm-hmm. Exactly the way to do it. And then, again, tying it back to lifecycle management, if you have that and you're looking at 20, 50 batches, what do? You got operators on the floor that are smart people that could sit down there and then start to suggest ways to continually optimize the process within the specifications of the filing to drive cost and out of the process and add efficiency to it. So it's a partnership all the way through to the day that the product's not manufactured anymore.
So the other thing is, obviously, based on what we've seen at Interfex and during the Interfex Live, it's got to be tech transfer. It's got to be jumping up. I mean, these things got to be spiking out for you.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the key to your success is having a strong tech transfer group. As more and more pharma companies start to see big pharma now outsourcing more. I mean, 10 years ago, you heard about it. You see the articles in the journals. You'd see the speakers at events like this one. It won't be long before big pharma doesn't manufacture their own products anymore. Well, not so quick. Was my reaction at the time. But I'm actually starting to see some of those predictions are starting to come around now. And at least in some types of products, they're more prone to outsource the larger volume products because it's just other people can do it and do it more efficiently. And that's key. The key to that is having a strong tech transfer foundation. If you can't tech transfer it in right, you'll never reliably supply the product.
Absolutely. I couldn't speak more. And the strength of a partner dictates just how much of a misery it's going to be. And to me, I mean, having a good partner, especially if it's developed right, allows lifecycle management, growth of new strengths, line additions, an adversarial or a poor relationship. Life cycle doesn't look good.
No, that's exactly right. And as people develop more products and work to come up with better treatments, the key is to find somebody that can reliably supply the product. And that really is through, a strong technology transfer foundation, a strong science base, a network that is proactive, that treats your products as if they're their own. And, that's the same thing you demand in an internal network. It's the same thing you should demand in an external network.
Absolutely. So that brings us to the close here on tech transfer and that role that they play in lifecycle management as CMO. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.